which I'm proud of. And I get comments from performers in the studio who say they hate me because, you know, the song has ended and everybody's waiting to cough or creak their chair and they can't move because the damn Laskin guitar is still going.
Still resonating. Yeah.
Yeah.
The day I can afford one of your guitars is the day I will buy one. But they're great. Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. I'm waiting. Right.
Perfect.
Anyway, you had a lot of complicated questions, so I'm ready to dive in.
Right. So I started recording the meeting here. That's great. I'm doing a backup on my phone, so that this should work. But essentially, what's happening is I'm writing a thesis paper on the perception of value in exotic hardwoods in acoustic guitars, and sort of the environmental issues surrounding harvesting woods like that. So my goal for sort of talking to you was to get like an expert opinion on what features make guitars good, why these woods are desirable, can people tell, in what kind of environments can they tell. So I have these questions that I've just sort of laid out for you. So the first question I had for you, if you could describe the relationship between craftsmanship and the quality of materials. So which is more important in a desirable guitar?
You know what? I would say craftsmanship, because you can take some wood that's crappy, but if you know what you're doing and build it intelligently, you can get an excellent guitar. Mm-hmm. In the same way, if you have incredible woods, but don't really know what you're doing, you can negate all the effects that the wood might have delivered. Right?
Right.
And one of the reasons I say that is because, you know, one of the sort of unspoken guidelines in luthiery is that you need 100 guitars under your belt to really start to get a sense of what the materials can do. That's because, you know, science can only take you so far. There are so many variables, and each piece of wood is different. I mean, the very next cut of wood off a bandsaw from one board, the grain is going to be fractionally different, and there might be things in it that cause it to vibrate differently. And then you're combining all these multiple variables that the only way you can make intelligent guesses, and that's what we're doing, is intelligent guesses and decisions about what we're doing, is by having used varieties, so many varieties of the material, you have a sense of what this wood with this grain and this thickness and this flexibility is going to do, likely to do when combined with this wood in this shape, with this scale length,
right,
etc. So, but to continue answering your question, the other thing that happens the longer you're in the field is your work just gets better, right? Yeah. Like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And accurate work means, or let's put it this way, the more accurate you're getting, the more you're getting in control of the sound. You'll know that the reason this one sounds a little bit better, made out of exactly the same woods, et cetera, to the last one, is because of the change you made. That one small change, you're in control because all your thicknesses were controlled, right, and all your processes were controlled. If not, you don't know if that effect was because of what you did or what you inadvertently did by accident, right?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a challenge I've found with sort of cause and effect. So attributing the effects of, for example, just a random example, but a guitar made of Brazilian rosewood, let's say a dreadnought, usually have lots of bass and stuff. Attributing sort of certain sound factors to different parts of the guitar, that seems like a bit of a challenge in sort of determining the quality of a guitar. So you might have a guitar that's really, really bassy and it resonates and it's cavernous, and how does a skilled luthier like yourself sort of attribute that sound to a particular aspect of the build?
Well, you know, before I try and answer that specifically, let's step back just a bit. And, you know, remind ourselves of how a guitar produces sound.
Right.
You know, the sound hole plays a role, but that's not where the sound's coming from, right? The entire thing is vibrating.
Right.
And moving the air molecules. And that's how you hear it, right?
Yeah.
So you want that thing to vibrate as efficiently as it can, as quickly as it can. And I say that because, you know, the accepted rule is that you have roughly 7% of the energy from your plucking hand remaining to deliver the sound. In other words, the bulk of the energy dissipates as heat, but that tiny bit of energy begins the process of coupling the vibrating strings to the touch points, to all the parts of the guitar, until it engages every part of the instrument, that whether it's the physical parts, the air volume in the box, you know, the vibrations going up and down the necks, everything is vibrating. I mean, you pluck one string and you lightly touch the edge of a tuning button and you feel the vibration.
Right.
And that's all vibrating and moving towards the hearer, right? So number one rule is build the instrument so efficient that it will maximize the speed and velocity of spreading that vibration through the whole damn thing,
Right.
so that there's enough energy there to be affected by how you've constructed it, which gives it its tone color.
Right. Right.
So that's the general thing you have to keep in mind, which, you know, guides a lot of things for me. And number one, spruce tops. Spruce is one of the most effective movers of vibration on the planet. The only things that can move vibration faster than spruce is some metals and glass. That's it.
Right.
And for example, you know, they say water is pretty efficient at moving. You know, and you know, whales talk to each other across the ocean, etc. Right?
Yeah.
But in water, sound moves at 330 meters a second.
Mm-hmm.
In spruce, with the grain lines, sound moves at something like 4,800 meters a second.
Wow.
Even across the grain lines, it's only a quarter of that, but that's still over 1,100 meters a second.
So that's going to give you a very reactive top, whereas you
reactive and speed of momentum of the vibration to hit the sides, move down the sides, couple the back, you know, engage the air volume, etc. And so
sort of objective indicators of quality in a guitar. So it sounds like maybe like objective versus subjectivity in tone and how people want guitars to sound. So would you say that speed of transmitting vibration is an objective indicator of a good guitar? I would think so.
Yeah. Oh, without question. Yeah. The more, if you want your instrument to be successful as an instrument, to be good at what it does, you have to be thinking of that. In addition to everything else, but that's a primary one, sort of that overrides everything.
What would be some other objective indicators of a quality instrument? So I'm thinking some like sustain, pretty universally desired.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Volume, pretty universally desired.
Yeah. Sustain, power, evenness of tone across the register,
String
and equal power as you go up in all the different positions on the neck.
Right.
Of course. Now, there's no such thing as an absolutely perfect guitar where every single note on every fret is just going to be ideal. There just is no such thing.
Do you think you could build the same guitar twice? Or are materials so variant that it's impossible to build the same instrument twice?
You know, I think the honest answer is that's impossible, but you can get very, very close so that the human ear may not be able to pick up the differences.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, the luthier building it, you are hearing all your instruments at exactly the same point, just strung.
Yeah.
So that's a comparative point because it's equal. And just from your own memory, you get the sense of, oh, this one's, boy, this one's really jumping out, or this one is holding, it's a little stiff. It's going to need some playing to come out, you know. But I will say most builders become consistent to the point where the customer knows they can expect X qualities of this from this builder. And, you know, it becomes to a large degree your signature sound that either appeals to people or it's not their taste and they go somewhere else, right? The sound and playability, those are the things that it kind of touches on something you hinted at as part of a question earlier. No two human beings hear the same way or want the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Because so much of how we hear is our own physiology, our own psychology, that plays a role in how we perceive sound. And knowing that, on one hand, it's a good thing.
I was going to say, sorry, I was going to say even like our social exposure to music genres might affect what we think sounds good.
Oh, absolutely. And and so there's room for every builder because you will find your players and they will find you eventually. Let me, an anecdote that kind of brought this to life for me. This is interesting. Somebody asked me, if you had to choose between a symphony player and a musician in a rock band, who do you think is going to lose their hearing first? And everybody thinks, oh, well, you know, the loud rock band because of the amplifiers and blah, 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 depending, are they thrash metal or what are they doing? Well, it turns out, no, it's the symphony player, because they are very often called upon to play music that they may not like.
Right.
So their entire physiology is tense. And so the effect on the ear is more damaging, whereas a rock player is usually playing whatever the hell they want to all the time, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
In terms of the perception of the difference between, I mean, we've talked about a lot of the quality of the build so far, but in terms of the materials, does it take somebody like you who's been at Luthier for decades to be able to perceive this difference? Like to perceive a difference between a good guitar and a bad guitar? And in what kind of environments can people tell? I've run into some instances like this great guitar that I built with Sergey. I've played it in pubs and stuff, really old environments where people might not really be able to tell that that's an African Blackwood.
Right,
Especially through the shitty PA that it's running through and the pickup and whatever bad mic. So I think what I'm really getting at is, like, at what point, like, how do we justify using these like rare materials and these really valuable and often endangered materials if, in my case, I'm gigging most of the time where it's an environment that people won't be able to tell the difference anyway.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, that's an interesting question, and that's some of the reasons why you see big, well-known performers, you know, playing Takaminis on stage, right? Or on tour, and they do that because they know their sound is really the pickups and the EQ that's happened by their sound crew that can make a lousy guitar sound a lot better and a great guitar sound crappy. But they also know they don't have to worry about it. If something happens to this guitar on stage, who gives a shit? They'll just get another one, right?
I'm horrified to bring my Sergey's
but
anywhere,
But a lot of them will keep their good instruments for studio.
Right.
When they're in total control and the environment, you can hear it. I mean, you have to make the guitar to be superb on its own. The environment it's played in is going to vary from time to time, from person to person. You can't look at it that way, except to just accept that, you know, in a performance, the sound you're hearing is dependent on the sound equipment it's being played into and the engineer or the guy who's running it, right?
So in terms of
the pickup you've got in, which can, you know, it can make a great guitar sound crappy.
So then in terms of like environmental initiatives in sort of sustainability with ebony and rosewood and stuff, do you think maybe we should limit the manufacturing of instruments with those materials to studio instruments? So maybe companies like Takamine should avoid using rosewood because it doesn't matter in the environment that most of those guitars are getting played. For example, I don't know if you've met Mark Stutman from Folkway Music.
Yeah, I've met Mark.
So I had a conversation with him. I don't know if I'm allowed to quote him, but we were talking about how companies like Taylor and other big manufacturers are using really high grade wood, particularly the spruce tops, really tight grain, old growth wood that they've harvested in Asia or somewhere else, and they're using it on guitars that they're selling for like $300. So his argument was that anything that's sort of just low retail value, just sort of like a pedestrian guitar, that should be made of like 6, 7, 8 piece tops with low grade wood. And we got to reserve these quality materials for the Grit Laskin guitars, the Sergey de Young guitars, because it's a limited supply of material, and we want to sort of keep those materials available. Would you?
I mean, you know, that's a valid point, but it's never going to happen. It won't reflect reality. Companies will do whatever they can do legally that will help them sell their stuff, especially when it's a big manufacturer and they've got numbers of these things to move every week, every day, every month, right? You know, but they won't use some of the rarer woods that often. Yes, they'll use Indian rosewood and stuff like that. But even the big manufacturers are trying some alternate materials and trying their best to push them. And I mean, you mentioned Taylor. I mean, he's been trying to push ebony that isn't jet black to get the market to accept that, because that's really the most ebony you can get nowadays. And so, you know, I mean, it's a valid point, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. So, you know, yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that.
Do you think, in terms of the Bob Taylor, is it Bob Taylor?
Yeah.
In terms of Taylor using non-jet black ebony, and then also I was doing a little bit of research on Godin using Richlight and their plastic sort of alternative. So I had a couple of questions about that. The first one: do you think that the desire for these woods is consumer driven or industry driven? So is it all the players that really want that nice Brazilian rosewood back and sides and the ebony fretboard, or is it an industry driven thing where manufacturers are pushing these materials because they think that they're better?
You know, to be honest, I think it's a bit of both. I think at the high end luthier world, it's the client. I mean, unless you're, you know, if you're not building to order and you're just building up stock to take to shows and things, I guess you can do whatever you want. But usually it's like my customers are, you know, they're the ones who pay attention to all the articles and all the discussions of different woods and what makes the best one and whose opinions. And they're the ones who want unusual, rare woods. Sometimes I'm scrambling to find this stuff that people want. Whereas the manufacturers, they will guide it by what they put out that people see in music stores that they can test out and choose whether to buy or not, right? So yeah, I really think it's both. I hate to say it, but you know, at a high level, when people are spending a lot of money, I guess they feel they're entitled to these rare woods. And then there's human psychology. I mean, the minute Brazilian rosewood was banned, I was swamped with people who wanted it.
Right.
Whereas I hardly used it before then.
Right.
And then everybody wanted their last gasp at this wood that may not be available, but I want mine. You know, there's human psychology there. So, you know, good luck battling that.
Yeah, you mentioned that in terms of companies using the materials that they are legally allowed to use. I did an interview with a professor of international development at the University of Guelph, and she mentioned that environmental initiatives with forestry in mind, sort of improving that, getting to a sustainable place, she said that in her opinion would be 100% derived from legislation, that it would be laws that would move not just lutherie, but any industry using wood towards more sustainable practices. And then this sort of, and I had also talked to Mark Stutman about this, but the other thing that I noticed was that exactly what you said with the Brazilian rosewood, that the laws that make these materials less available is sort of what's driving them up in price too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, God. But that's kind of normal. If it's rare, if there's less and less of it, then you're going to pay more and more for it. Listen, or now there's the tree mahogany, right?
Oh, the tree?
The tree. I've never built with it until I got one coming up. But I said to this customer, look, I don't I'm not in the mood to overpay for this wood. That it's going to sound fine, but it's not going to be exceptional. It's only that it's so bloody rare. And I said, and on top of that, where's the proof that it all came from the same damn tree?
Yeah.
To me, it feels like all these people who say they have one of Jesus's finger bones, but how do you know, right?
No, right?
Of course not. But this guy, I
I-
told him I'm not buying it, but he paid 6,000 US for one set.
For the
And
back.
he sent it to me to work with.
Holy shit.
And I like, if you want to do that, fine, go ahead.
I thought it was crazy.
But
Sergey.
now I'm going to be nervous. Pardon?
I paid Sergey DeYoung like $800 for the African Blackwood, and I thought I was going crazy, right?
Yeah.
So it's amazing what people, when they get hooked on the idea of something they want, that it's especially something that is associated with people's expression. Like these are musical instruments, so not only do people want these materials because they sound better, but that makes it's part of them. They sound better. I'm going to be a better player if I have the Brazilian rosewood, and that's going to define my sound as a musician and make me better, and people want to hear me more and stuff. So there's that association as well.
Yeah, but welcome to humans, right?
Right. Going back to the rich light with Godin, I was going to ask you for your opinion on whether or not, well, first of all, your opinions on what rich light is, if it's better, if it's worse, what are the benefits of using it, if it's a waste or if it's just cost effective. And then if you had an opinion on whether using rich light is environmentally responsible.
I won't be able to, I've never used it.
Yeah.
I'm aware of it. I've never had a reason to use it. On the surface, it seems like, okay, if black ebony is what people want and it's becoming harder and harder to get, fine, use a substitute. It is the area of the instrument the least important for the sound.
Right.
So, okay, you can substitute something there, but I haven't done it or worked with it, so I apologize. I just don't have I can't really give you an honest opinion about it.
No problem. In terms of, we're sort of getting away from wood right now, but I wanted to ask you, because you're really famous for like incredible inlay. And a lot of materials that use a lot of abalone and pearl and stuff.
Oh, sure. I use 9 different kinds of shell, at least 20 different kinds of stone, metals, legal ivories.
Are there any sort of environmental sustainability issues that you've run into with using those materials?
Well, actually, yes and no. You should know the abalone is controlled by CITES now, right? And but it turns out the species of abalone that they control is not the one that's harvested for use in musical instruments.
Right.
Customs people don't know that, so that freaks everybody out. They're going to look at it, see abalone, and go, "Oh my God, I better send this one to Fish and Wildlife. There's a problem here." But it is we're not the ones causing the problem. But it's like anything else. If it's rare and it's becoming an environmental issue, we look for alternatives. I mean, that's a lot of where the first of all, there's the laminates, the shell laminates, the abalams, and Larry and Chuck, who invented it, Chuck Erickson and Larry Seifel from Pearlworks, they've got like 35 different flavors, different shells, different grainings that they put together. And this is great for the environment. Number one, it gives you these big sheets. So people like me who really stretch the inlay envelope, I can get long, seamless pieces.
Right.
And I can use them as backgrounds, as representing water, whatever it is. But it also was a way of using more of the shell and not wasting parts of the shell.
Right.
Their entire technique, well, a shell is like that, right?
Yeah.
And they came up with a way to learn how to cut on the curve, thin slices, and even though it is a rigid protein, it would flex and flatten out so they could layer them and glue them together. So they're using parts of the shell that used to be thrown away.
That would just be offcuts that would be
That
discarded.
would be offcuts. So it's environmentally helpful that way.
Yeah.
So there's the laminate, and then there's the stone, which is the recon stone, the reconstructed stone,
Right.
which is real ore. They pulverize into a powder, reassemble in a vacuum with a resin to hold it together,
Mhm.
and you've broken the molecular structure, and you now have a rock that looks like the rock, but you can cut it and file it and sand it like bone.
So do you think using these sort of alternate materials like the laminates and the
Recon stone.
recon stone, um, that sounds like a fantastic idea because like an inlay wouldn't necessarily have the sound of an instrument.
No, no, and that's on that. That's why I personally
Mhm.
stick to the neck.
Mhm.
You know, I don't. I mean, people have wanted me to inlay the tops, and
Yeah.
occasionally I've said yes to the back, but kind of reluctantly because I don't want to affect how the thing vibrates.
Right.
But I know here I'm inlaying dense materials into the densest part of the instrument anyway.
Right.
It's
Right.
going to resist the wear from the fingers, and it's also not going to affect the sound negatively in to any way you can perceive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's not only it opened up what you can do creatively with inlay, but it also is environmentally, you're using less and less shell, which used to be pretty much the only thing was done with inlay, mother of pearl and abalone, right?
Right. Yeah. My next question was about wood age and the sort of environment that trees grow in. So if
Mm.
you explain beyond the species of wood, sort of the other features of wood that make it desirable. So like tightness of grain, how old it is, how dry it is, where
Yeah.
it grew, and stuff like that. What makes a tree desirable?
Huh. Um, well, maybe let's stay with spruce, you know, with a softwood, the top wood, the soundboard. Um, Only because that one is the more critical with grain, and you know we're looking at all the directions. So you want evenness of grain, you want stiffness, you want it quartered, and you want no runoff, right?
Hmm.
You know what I mean by runoff? I'm just
Yeah,
being
grain running off on an
yeah,
angle.
at an angle through the tree.
Yeah.
So you've got to split before you start cutting, so you follow the angle, right?
Mhm.
And if it's cut properly, and then you look at color. And I do tap tones, you
Right.
know, but I'm more listening for sustain. I'm not listening for the note that it produces because that's going to vary depending on how thick it is in the raw, what its dimensions are. Everything's going to affect it. So you're
Right.
just getting a sense, is this one kind of dull or does this one really ring? And
Right.
I don't even know, to be honest, if that makes any damn difference, but it's fun to do
Yeah.
and it feels good, you know?
Right.
So we just do it. And if I have to choose, I've got, you know, a whole pile of beautiful tops for the next one. I'll take the first ones off the top, tap them, and if one really seems to jut out, okay, I'm going to use that. What the hell?
Yeah.
But so you're really just trying to match all the qualities that you feel are important as consistently as you can from one piece to the next, one guitar to the next.
Right.
And that helps you be consistent in your sound, which is critical for people to put in an order and know that they're not taking a risk that they're going to get the one that's a dud this year, right?
Right.
You know, I mean, usually people are more impressed, you know, happily, knock on some wood. But I tell them, look, if you're not happy, no matter how customized, you don't have to take it. The last thing I want is you playing this guitar and people say, hey, you got your new guitar and you like it. And you go, well, I don't know. It's not the Laskin.
Not sure.
Not so good. You know, you can't have anybody saying that, right? But no one's ever taken me up on it,
Right.
thankfully.
Right. So with those things considered with spruce, why is something like rosewood desirable as a backwood? Why do people want it in the first place?
Yeah, you know, I mean, the role of the backs, people have different opinions. I don't think anyone will disagree that it's playing a role in how flexible it is, how it's reflecting the sound, its natural brittleness tells you something about how it's likely to vibrate. I think that's really the key, is how efficient is it at vibrating. And Brazilian rosewood, old growth Brazilian, not the stump wood with the wild grain and stuff, but the traditional wood from the main trunk of the tree is one of the best woods for transferring vibration, and it has a natural brittleness.
Right.
So does ziricote. So does African blackwood.
Mm-hmm.
And this natural brittleness, which means it's a little more prone to cracking than other woods, which is why the manufacturers never got into these woods in a big way, because it'd be too dangerous. The thing could be cracking even in their process before it leaves the shop.
Right.
And we're all used to it, you know. But that's one of the reasons these woods contribute to producing such excellent quality of sound, is their ability to move vibration so exceptionally. And you have to know, I mean, when Brazilian rosewood was stumbled upon, and this was, you know, the 19th century, or even before that, when people were building guitars, early guitars, out of the flamed maples in Europe, the flamed sycamore that was traditional in the bowed instrument family, and they were trying out some hardwoods, they went to one that was readily available in their local lumberyard down the street, tons of it, because it was the pretty wood that everybody was using for all kinds of things. They used it and they found it just made better sounding guitars than the maple. More vibrant, more instantly alive, more responsive. And because of that, it was delivering better qualities. So they settled on it and it became the standard. That doesn't mean there wouldn't have been other woods that have done just as good, but because it was the one, it became accepted as the best. And it became used on all guitars until, you know, it was banned, right? In 92. And then everybody switched to Indian rosewood, because Indian rosewood specific gravity is the closest to Brazilian than all the other rosewoods. There's more like 200 rosewoods in the world, all in the same family. Bubinga, Cocobolo, Kingwood. There's 4 rosewoods from Brazil that aren't, you know, separate from the one that's Delbergia Negra.
You mentioned specific gravity. Could you explain specific gravity?
Specific gravity, and you know, I'm not the scientist, but that's a term used to kind of encapsulate all the mathematical, you know, its strength to weight ratios, its tensions, and it's sort of summed up as its specific gravity. And you can see tables for all wood species and stuff like that. And it tells you something about its elasticity, how flexible it will be to vibrating, because that's what we want it to do, to vibrate, right? So elasticity is important to us, whereas it isn't for a furniture maker, right?
Right. Yeah,
I wish I could tell you more, but I'm not the scientist. People like Dave Wren really studies that stuff. Serge may have done it too. I mean, you know, you learn from Sergei de Young, and he's a smart cookie and a brilliant builder. So I know. I hope you're picking his brain as well.
Yeah, I know his daughter is working with. She does tests with. She'll vibrate the tops and like some sort of sand substance on top of it.
Yeah, that tells you where the nodes are of the different tones, and especially in classical, sometimes that's helpful because you could end up with some odd wolf tones, and you know, like where the note does something funny in its sustain, it goes sharp or it starts to vibrate or something funny, and they call them wolf tones. It's more common in arched instruments when the top and back plates aren't properly configured and tuned together. But in flat tops, so-called, even though there's a slight arch, it's not as critical, but you can sometimes have problems. And finding out where the nodes are and where there's problem nodes, and doing a bit of sanding or adding brace to limit what's happening there, little nuances like that can be done. And that's where that kind of testing came out of.
Right.
Aside from the fact that it's just interesting. Okay, when you vibrate it at this frequency, look what happens. And then when you vibrate it at this frequency, now all the sand moves in and goes here. You know, but it's a bit entertainment. I mean, just to be honest, okay?
It's very cool, yeah.
It is cool, but there is a lot of bullshit in instrument world. only because there's room for it, because nobody fully understands it
Right.
in total. And I designed an experiment once, and I had hoped to get somebody at a university level to do this for their thesis, somewhere where they could get access to a scanner, like a CT scanner.
Right.
And I wanted to vibrate controlled pieces of spruce.
Hmm.
And I designed how you would do it, control and then vibrate it in different ways, and then look at what is happening at a molecular level when it's raw, when it's been vibrated, and when it's been vibrated longer, what happens over time. We know that wood changes
Right.
and becomes more efficient at vibrating when it's vibrated. That happens to all wooden instruments. And in general, we understand that the cell structure begins to settle and align itself differently than if it was just sitting still, which means it becomes more efficient at delivering the sound.
Hmm.
You know, over time, that translates to, from the same energy from your hand, more sound going out, or
Right.
equal sound to what you used to get, but with less effort.
So are
I
you
mean, you,
that sort of reminds me of basically a guitar that's been a guitar for longer will sound better.
oh, sure, it just develops. It's true, even a crappy guitar, if it's made out of wood, it's going to develop. Now, what happens is its qualities are there, get enhanced, and as it becomes efficient, certain frequencies that were there but were outside of human hearing are enhanced enough to move into audible. And
Right.
that's how the human ear perceives an older guitar as mellowing or maturing,
Right.
or, and doing all these things, becoming more responsive. And that's how we hear it. But what we're doing is the band of frequencies that we hear is widening out.
Right.
And back to a question you asked about woods, what's generally accepted wisdom, and I can't say it's wrong, but I don't have actual proof, that woods like mahogany, when it develops, it kind of stays shallow.
Right.
Rosewood picks up more low frequencies, so you hear it as mellowing over time. Maple picks up low frequencies but loses the high end. And so a lot of blues players who want a bit more thuddy basses, like maple guitars, big maple guitars.
Right.
Now, that's kind of a general way of thinking about it. But in general, it is accepted that rosewood picks up the low frequencies without losing the highs.
Right.
That's one of the reasons the whole industry has stuck with that family of material.
Right. In terms of sort of a private luthier like yourself building guitars, what danger would you face as a sort of small business owner, for lack of a better term, for refusing to use something like Brazilian rosewood or something like an endangered species?
I suppose you might lose an order if somebody's really sticky, but tell you the truth, I stopped buying Brazilian a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only thing left on my shelf is pretty crappy stuff, And
Yeah.
I tell people when they want Brazilian, I said, look, don't. You're going to have issues crossing a border.
Yeah.
You don't want to contribute to it. There's so many other woods. That's why I tell people, my favorite wood these days is blackwood.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best equivalents in terms of sound delivery. But so I just try and talk my customers out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, worst case, they're adamant. They want that wood. I'm not going to get it for them. They're going to have to go to somebody else.
Right.
And
Do you think there will be somebody else who was willing to make it?
Yeah. Or maybe somebody who just has a big stash. I mean, Linda Manzer has tons of it. Some of it's pretty crappy, but she's got a lot because she picked up a bunch at one point thinking I can use this someday, and then the wood was banned.
Yeah.
I mean, Serge had a bunch too.
Yeah. That's great stuff. Sorry, I'm just gonna go to my my next question.
No problem.
So, in terms of you mentioned the sort of culture of the standard in wood, that the rosewood has become the standard wood that people are using, especially like acoustic instruments. I was wondering in terms of how players, like celebrities, famous bluegrass musicians or other musicians, how they might affect what wood is the standard and what wood is desirable. And I'm bringing this up in particular reference to maybe somebody like Jack White, who in the 90s started using those fiberglass, that red, that red Sears guitar he has.
I'm not sure, but anyway.
Well,
Okay.
when you get a chance, give it a Google. It's when the White Stripes had that whole color scheme where everything was red. He was using a
Okay.
Alco guitar made of fiberglass. That before he started using that guitar, it was from the 60s. That guitar was worth $80 maybe, right?
Yeah.
And then his sort of association with that instrument has made those guitars extremely expensive now. So I was
Yeah.
wondering about your opinion on if we got Tony Rice to start playing or something like that, just to Tony Rice to start playing guitars that were only made of plywood and just really they were cherry and Paduk, and it's something that was a little bit more sustainable, Pau Ferro and stuff. Do you think that his sort of endorsement would affect the direction and the desires of the industry?
I imagine, yeah. I don't see why not. Some people, would say, "Oh, my, listen to his sound, and I love that, and so I want that."
Yeah.
Because I get that comment from players. They hear other players. They say, I went to so and so's concert. Your guitar sounded so great. I want one like he's got.
Right.
So of course that would happen. Yes, to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
but not to every degree. And there's so many different genres of music and so many different musicians. So it depends how influential they are. I mean, some of the big pop stars nowadays, if they aren't rap artists, but they're actual musicians who play something,
Yeah.
they're typically playing cheapo guitars.
Yeah.
Or at most a Taylor or something like on their TV shows, right?
Yeah.
And they, so I don't know if their average fan who might want to just start playing guitar even notices or cares, or it's on their radar at all what the wood is made out of or what the guitar is made out of. I think that's for people who are more into it seriously. And I think what would be more influential or equally influential to players like the Tony Rices of the world is the articles in guitar magazines.
Yeah.
That's where, these magazines that need to fill up the editorial content every month.
Yeah.
So there's endless articles on cedar top versus spruce top versus redwood versus, this spruce, or you should use moon spruce and it's got to be this. And, and then they believe what they read and they come to me and say, yeah, but I'm supposed to want this or that. And I tell them, look, whatever you read, you have to take it all with a grain of salt and understand that when a luthier is talking, they're telling you what effect those woods have on their guitars.
Yeah.
Because on your guitars, with its variables, it could be completely different.
Right.
So you can't necessarily count on the effect that you read. You're going to get it when you buy a different guitar. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt and understand, that they're looking for another article about woods because we've got 4 pages to fill here, and it's like the woodworking magazines, yet another article about how to sharpen your chisels with all these rare Japanese stones and this and that. Because they're filling editorial content. That's all.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what more to say on that subject, but I'm sure it would have some effect.
To sort of direct back to what I said that Mark Stutman's argument was, because you mentioned that the average sort of pop musician is using a not very expensive, not very high-end instrument.
Yeah.
Therefore, their fans probably don't either, and don't perceive like those instruments as they might not necessarily care about the material that it's made of.
Yeah.
And that, again, Mark Stutman's argument was that these people don't care enough to listen to the materials. They are not perceiving these differences actively. So we should be making guitars from Taylor and from Godin and Siegel and Yamaha and sort of these lower end companies. We should be making these guitars out of plywood because people aren't listening well enough. that are playing those guitars that it would make a difference to them?
Well, some of them are plywood,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
at the very low end of those big manufacturers. But yeah, I mean, it's a valid comment, but I don't see it happening too fast. That's all.
I mean, the other sort of radical point that he made, Mark made, was that I think he used the term peak guitar. Is that we're at peak guitar, and there's enough guitars that have been made right now to sustain anybody who wants a guitar for the next 20 years, that they could just go get a used guitar. So I think probably one of my last questions would be, as an environmental initiative, do you think that it would be reasonable for guitar players to just only buy used guitars? Does that help in terms of sustaining materials?
You froze. I don't know
Oh,
if you can hear me.
I can hear you well, but the video has frozen.
Hold on. You're frozen.
And you're back. You're good?
Yeah, and now you're back. You froze in the middle of your question.
Oh, okay.
So you have to start again. Sorry.
I forgot what I said. What did I start with? Oh no.
You said it was the final question.
Oh yeah. So just as probably one of my final questions, because I think we've gone through basically all of them. In terms of
Froze again.
okay. Am I back?
Now.
Moving. Okay, we're good. All right. Let me see if I can get my question out. So Mark Stutman had noted that there's enough guitars in the world right now to sustain us for a long time.
Right.
Did you see that part of the question?
Yeah.
So do you think as an environmental initiative, it would be reasonable for guitar stores and guitar builders to sort of push people towards buying a used guitar rather than a new one, in the same sort of way that maybe somebody who's selling a car might push somebody to buy a used car as sort of an environmental initiative? I mean, if that was successful, it would push luthiers out of business.
Yeah, I'm unsure about that because lots of used guitars sell all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that you'd have any effect really that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue, the luthiers, we're not the ones creating the environmental issue, right?
Right.
Yamaha will buy a river of rosewood, whereas, in our working lifetime, we won't even use up as much wood as is used to print the New York Times for one day.
Yeah.
So it's all a matter of, of scale. And yet, at the low level, we think about this stuff all the time because usually if we're passionate and in the arts and craft like we are, we're typically more perceptive and more aware of these issues and paying attention and trying to do our bit. So we're looking at other things. I mean, I've been using more varieties of woods than I've ever used in my career. And it's with, the clients asking about, well, have you ever tried this? Or how about you make me one out of this wood, and there's all kinds of species. I mean, I've got a stack of Indian rosewood on my shelf that I can't remember the last time I even went into that stash to get a set.
Right.
I've been using so many different materials.
Right.
And some of them have been sounding amazing. Lots in the ebonies, like Mun ebony, and lots of Macassar, and Ziracote I've always loved for years. I'm trying to think. Oh, I blanked out on the name of one I wanted not zebra wood, but anyway, sorry, I'm blanking out on another species that I was really knocked out at how good it sounded. I'd never used it before. I'm making a new model of bass, and I'm using myrtle.
Oh, okay.
Of all things, because other people said they've been trying it on acoustic basses and finding it sounded great. Okay, I'm giving it a shot. So that's one way things are changing for luthiers like me. And because I'm small in a small production, I've got enough ebony and mahogany to more than finish out my career.
Right.
There'll be wood left over for my estate to sell to somebody.
And in terms of that, I have two more questions. In terms of the proportion of a small business luthier like yourself, do you think that the guitar making industry as a whole, so including Gibson, including Martin, including Taylor, is a significant proportion of deforestation problems across the world that they should have, that they should be really doing anything at all. Because I've just ran into some people that are saying, you know, the guitar building industry is so small relative to clear cutting in terms for soy farms in Brazil and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that the guitar world is a big enough proportion that we have incentive to try to improve?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I agree. We're, you know, even with the big manufacturers, it's still relatively small
Right.
compared to like, you know, monster furniture manufacturing
Yeah.
and pulping for paper.
Right.
My God, in our computer age, you'd think it'd all be digital, and there's more paper used because we've all got our own printers and we're
Right.
all having fun with them, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I buy recycling paper all the time, but still, you're right. We're not any of the major users of trees on the planet.
Right.
That said, for 2x4s, you can do a tree farm because you don't worry about the quality, but you can't do a tree farm for the species we need. You know, they tried that with Brazilian rosewood and they got brown 2x4s.
Yeah.
But when Brazil discovered how to regrow it, because there was so much value in the wood for them,
Right.
they figured out where it needs to be in terms of rainfall in the forest, what other species need to be nearby to help it propagate properly. And then they clear small little paths in these areas, plant, and we could be less than a generation away from the regrowth of Brazilian rosewood, because they've been working on this for a few decades now,
Fantastic.
only because there's so much money in it, so much value.
Do you think as the sort of decline of I want to say like rock music or guitar-based music, do you think is that we're sort of seeing a decrease in that? Or I guess maybe that's not even a true statement. We might not be, but
No, you're right. I was thinking that, and I was going to mention it. You've hit a nail properly on the head. I think we have passed the peak of guitar use. It's still the most popular instrument on the planet because
right.
it's portable and you get bass and treble in one instrument. The
Right.
only other instrument that does that really is like a zither or a piano, right?
Right.
And so that's why it's in every damn culture in
Right.
so many different forms, right? And it's also still developing. It's not like the violin that peaked and current builders are trying to reproduce what was reached before.
Yeah.
The instrument is still evolving and we're all part of pushing that evolution.
Right.
So there's all those dynamics. That means it's still going to be popular, but I agree, because we've really passed the peak of the rock era,
yeah,
and the folk era and all that stuff where guitar was central. Now that we're in the hip hop world where it's electronics and, you know, just rapping, etc.
yeah,
But they still have guitar players in their backup bands, you know,
yeah,
but it's not, but the main people aren't, kids aren't incentivized to pick up a guitar the same way they were, certainly in our generation. And I remember reading a story, reading Billy Bragg's biography, or biography of a certain genre of music in the UK that was skiffle. You ever heard that term, skiffle?
sure, yeah.
Everybody from the Beatles to the Rolling Stone to all the folkies, they all started in skiffle bands.
There was a famous Jimmy Page interview where he was a kid playing skiffle on TV.
Yeah, because that was the trend that hit the UK. It was really kind of American traditional mountain music, but played with more energy and a little faster.
Yeah.
And everybody was in a skiffle band because everybody could do it. You didn't need talent. Just grab a guitar, learn 3 chords, get somebody with a wash tub to create a bass, and you're away.
Yeah.
And so guitar sales in the UK went in 5 years from 2,000 to 250,000.
Yeah.
All because of skiffle. And then the folk revival came out of that. Then the rock music thing happened out of that. It was all these skiffle players. Every one of those bands were all skiffle players.
I think the most beautiful thing about that kind of evolution too is that you wouldn't get these people coming up in skiffle bands that would, they get the new guitar and they they play and they say, that's not Brazilian rosewood. I don't. That's
No, 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 no.
get the guitar and play. That's what it's about at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. And
Um,
there's still some people like that, but then yeah, the people who order guitars from me and Serge and Linda and Dave Wren and all of us at this level, they are paying attention to the materials.
yeah, there's a funny. I don't know if you've heard the term blues lawyer, but it's sort of some of the guys my age were calling guys blues lawyers. So it's uh, think of the kind of guy that would be spending $25,000 on a '58 Les Paul.
Okay,
Um,
gotcha.
but he's really a dentist or he's a lawyer.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he swears that he could tell the difference. I mean, a lot of these guitars are genuinely that good, but the professional musicians in lots of cases aren't playing the $65,000 vintage Gibson or something, because musicians aren't getting paid enough money to afford these instruments, which is kind of the biggest irony of it.
It is ironic. I agree. You broke up a little in the last question, so sorry. But I was going to say, I found, especially in the classical side, I found the better the player, the less picky they were, because they had the ability from talent and experience to know how to get the best out of whatever guitar they had in their hands. Whereas the amateur player would complain, oh, this B flat up here, I don't know, it doesn't sound as good as the one over here, and anyway. And so it kind of touches on that.
Yeah, it's I think it's the more amateur, not maybe amateur, but the maybe intermediate players that are the most picky about whether or not they're, as this goes beyond just the instruments too, into effects pedals and amps and stuff too.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's a whole other word. So my last question was on the geographic location of where we're sourcing woods from.
Okay.
So is it more environmentally stable, sustainable to source and build guitars out of local woods? And is it possible, depending on where you are? So like as a Canadian luthier, are you able to build a guitar completely out of Canadian wood and have it at the level that a guitar built from lots of different places would be?
Yeah, you should be able to come close. I mean, a standard thing would be maple.
Yeah.
And that makes, maple's been used on guitars for a long time. And then you'd have Sitka spruce from BC, and you can make the neck out of maple. You could use some other hardwood for the fretboard that isn't ebony. I mean, you could do it. And the guitar would be decent. So sure, it's possible.
Do you think that's a luxury that maybe only Canada and a couple other countries really have? Because we do have a lot of lumber in terms of a natural resource.
Yeah, I mean, well, the States could do that too. Any major lumbering nation where they're big enough to still have forests,
Thinking, as we were talking about England, I'm not sure if England has enough forests left.
Yeah. And but it depends. It might be a point where you're making 4-piece backs or 6-piece backs where you're just layering them together because the trees aren't big enough.
Right.
I will say, to me, the sound of a guitar is the sound of wood vibrating.
Right.
Not ABS plastic, not carbon fiber. They're fine, get a rain song guitar or whatever to take, camping with, and you can paddle with it and then play it around the campfire. You're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And that has a place, but they sound okay, but they don't sound excellent.
Right. And we want to sound excellent.
And your goal should be excellence every time.
Right. Well, I think that's a really profound spot to sort of end off.
Okay.
But this was, I mean, if there was anything else that you wanted to add, but this has been really fruitful conversation, and I wanted to thank you for having this chat.
Okay. No, I'm glad we could work it out and that it could help, and good luck with your thesis.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any chance that all of us who you end up talking to are going to get a chance to see it when you're done?
Yeah, I can definitely send you a copy. It'll be done in about 2 weeks, and I'll be able to send you a copy by email of the paper and let you have a read. Perfect. I'll be quoting. I think Sergey's not available. He was originally going to be, but hopefully Linda is going to be able to email me back. We're not doing a in-person like a
Mhm.
interview. She's just going to sort of type out some answers to the questions that I asked you. But hopefully Manzer is going to be able to do it, and Tony,
Right.
well, Tony McManus, and so there's going
Good.
to be lots of people that I'm interviewing. But yeah,
Oh, that sounds good. Well, good luck with it. And I just had a question. So what's it, what level is this for? Like, what
this
are
is
you?
for my final paper for my undergrad. So I'm a
Okay.
double major in history and music at the University of Guelph.
Okay.
And so every degree program will have what's called a capstone project. So it's basically the last paper that you write as your undergrad degree. So I've chosen this
Right.
topic, and so it's I guess the unofficial term would be an undergrad thesis.
Gotcha. Okay. You know, depending on how it comes out or what approach you're taking, you might end up, submit it to a guitar magazine or something.
Submit it to Fretboard Journal or something, and help them fill up
Yeah,
those 4 pages.
exactly. There you go. See, tell
Yeah,
them you're going to do them a favor. You're
right.
going to send them some content.
Absolutely, that would be amazing.
Anyway,
Perfect.
well, thank you for your thoughtful questions. They got me thinking.
Yes, yeah, and thanks for having the chat.
Okay,
Stay safe and stay healthy and all that stuff. In the
so far so good.
all right, thanks so much.
Okay,
See you later.
take care.